So just so you know, we're recording this now.
Okay.
And anything we do will not be private.
All right.
So you know.
Safe to go.
I'm going to start sharing a Google presentation here if I can find it on my page. Yep, here we go. Share screen. Google presentation. There it is. Okay. So this session, I can't see you guys while I'm doing this, so just know that I'm not really looking at you right now. So if it seems weird because I'm not paying attention,
Okay.
because I can't.
Can we just talk if we've got questions?
You can, and actually you pop up on my screen when you have questions, so that's awesome. So this is just really about how to do cases in world schools. And Rachel, for you, it's going to seem pretty obvious because it's a lot like any other debate case that we might work on. But for people that have never written, there are a lot of things that may be different for them. So the first thing that you really need to do with world schools is make sure that you define terms, have reasonable definitions. And really that is the key, because in traditional debates, sometimes we try to find the most obscure definition, or we might find a definition that would give us an advantage. But actually that is against rules in world schools. You're expected to debate the topic that you're given, and you're not expected to try to find loopholes to the topic. Does that make sense? So part of the judging criteria actually is, did they have reasonable interpretation of the topic? So no one would be expected to be looking at what we might call squirrel cases in traditional debate, okay? So one of the first thing is when you receive the motion, so like one of ours is about that Common Core not benefiting children, right? We would expect that Common Core is defined as the standardized system in the United States. You may be able to find something somewhere that says a Common Core is something else, but in world schools, everyone would expect that any intelligent person would know that means the system that we've created across this country for curriculum standards. And so that's what would be expected of the debaters in the round. Does that make sense? And so the issue that you're debating, we would expect everybody to come in with the same interpretation, because if we're looking at common man, what would an intelligent person think about this? That would be what we would expect to see in the round. You know, is that enough about that? So sometimes well, that's enough, I guess, about that. The second piece of that is that if the motion poses a clear issue for debate, then that's what we have to debate, which we already talked about a little bit, that Common Core idea. So every resolution is going to be worded as this House believes that, and that means the government of our country is what we're looking at, okay? If we were in a world situation like we were for nationals, depending on how the resolution was worded, it might mean the UN is this House. And some of the resolutions we come up with this year may have more of a UN focus. So for instance, one of the resolutions we debated was this House believes that agricultural subsidies need to be ended, okay? That we decided was a US focus, although there were other agricultural subsidies other places. The US is most heavily agriculturally subsidized. When we had a resolution about this House believes that the Greeks should exit the euro, we decided that the House would be the European Union, and that defined who was the government in that actor. We also had a resolution, I can't remember what it was now, but we had a resolution that forced us to think about the House being the UN, okay? So you really have to look at the resolution and decide who the government entity is for that resolution. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes.
So that is part of what this defining the terms is you have to decide who the actor is, because it always will just say this House, and you have to determine who that means. If there is no reasonable, obvious meaning to the resolution, then you can look here, it talks about you have to go truisms and tautologies leave the opposition room for debate and are clearly illegitimate. You can't choose something that would cause the opposition not to have any ground. So it's very much like traditional debate that way, right? If you define out everything that is negative, that isn't allowed, okay? So in traditional debate, in public forum, or more correctly, LD in policy, we might say, well, define it, and we'll tell. If you hear my laundry's going off, sorry, that's my dryer buzzing. Hopefully it won't buzz again. My husband had very nicely put laundry in before I got home. In traditional debate, that might be an advantage. You define out everything, and the judge has to listen to the arguments from the other side as to why that's not a legitimate definition, right? In world schools, that would actually be frowned on. They would say, you're just trying to create rhetoric. That isn't what this is about. So world schools is really about reasonable debate, that everybody can debate, that we're not setting it up to be trickery, that really, like, we want to debate the issue here. Don't be telling us that the issue isn't this, okay? So if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so you really have to look for the obvious meaning and what is the most reasonable meaning for debate. And that's really what you're looking for. You're looking for a dictionary definition that's commonly accepted, that's not so obscure that people are going to come to the round unprepared. We want everybody to be prepared so that when they debate, it isn't a puzzle, if that makes sense. Okay? So that first piece, though, definition of terms, is important. So I'm going to pop up here, if I can, an example. So here is the beginning of a case that this isn't the final version from the national tournament that we used, but it was when we were working on the agricultural subsidy case, and we started this way.
Okay.
And whether or not it was a man or a woman as the judge, right? So you have to change Mr. Chair or Madam Chairwoman. Members of the opposition, we come here today to discuss a prevalent issue in today's society. The federal government has had both positive and negative aspects on business in the United States, and we are now faced with the business of agriculture, specifically agricultural subsidies, which is defined as money given to farmers by the government. So that's our definition. So we didn't say we're going to define our terms, we put it into the introduction, okay? When implemented, the system has both positive and negative effects on our economy, which is highly debatable. This is not what must be focused on. Too often, money is what's prioritized, and that is exactly the case with these subsidies. They have created a much more prevalent issue at hand, a destruction of our environment. So we're saying, although when you look to this, you think subsidies is about money, really subsidies has more problems than that. So yes, we're going to define subsidies as money, but when we look to the debate, we're also going to define this debate needs to be about the environment. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So they talked about how crops are planted and not allowed to be rotated, and there were a lot of issues other than just should the government pay money or not. Okay, so the definitions came in this first paragraph, and then they got into the meat of here are my points. What, Jeff? Did you have a question, Jeff?
No.
Okay, I thought I heard you raise your hand to me. Okay. Rachel, you can see how that's a little different than traditional debate, right?
Yes, I'm going to have to look at a couple of case examples so I keep them straight.
So I will send those to you guys as well, okay?
Perfect.
So you actually are going to end up writing an affirmative case or a proposition case and an opposition case. The proposition case needs to be, the round, it's 8 minutes for that debate, for that first speech. But remember, the opponents can stand up and ask points of information, okay? So we coached our students to have about a 6-minute case. And by 6-minute case, I don't mean one that they are flying through reading quickly. They need to
go at a normal tempo, right?
Normal, and maybe even slower than you would normally speak, because we speak a little fast up here in North Dakota, if you haven't noticed. So a persuasive speech speed. So not incredibly fast. So we told our kids to write a first speech that is maybe 6 minutes long, because you have to count on that the opposition is going to want to ask questions. And you need to take some of those questions. Jake is going to talk about those tomorrow night in the Points of Opposition webinar, which if you can't make it to, we'll record that one too and publish it. So, but tomorrow night, he's going to talk more about how to use that points of information. But in case construction, you need to be aware of it, because you don't want to write an 8-minute speech and then not be able to get to all of it because they've done points of information, okay? The opposition also needs to write a case. But in addition to doing the case, they need to start rebutting the points that the proposition has made. So even though they are going to write a case, now we said maybe it's going to be 5 minutes, because you have points of opposition and you want to start to call into question or challenge the other side, okay? I'm going to pop back for a second to that example case. Can you see that, this Google Doc? Are you guys seeing what I'm seeing?
It takes it a moment to switch over. There it is, yes.
Okay, so you'll see it's pretty written out at the beginning, but as you go through, you'll see that he starts to get to the point where he's just got points and a little evidence, and then they actually, these are other things down here, they actually get to the point where it's not really pre-written, okay? So the more they can, and especially in those impromptu rounds, the more they can speak from an outline, the better. I think I might have just locked us up. It'll come back in just a second if you can still hear me. If you can't, I will be back in a second. Okay, I think I locked up. Are you guys seeing me yet? Yes? Okay, so here was, yes. I pulled up a second document that shows you more pre-written questions and rebuttals. So we actually had our nationals kids go through and say, well, what's a question they could ask about this topic? What would be an answer to that question? Because maybe they'll ask you and you need to know how to answer it. So we went through and made a document that was like that, and then you'll see at the bottom just more specific points that they... Yes. Hi.
Welcome back, Gail.
I'm back.
We lost you for a moment.
Hope that didn't
interrupt
the recording, but we'll see. So what I was saying is, in the later speeches, the other 8-minute speeches, they really are going to have to be speaking from an outline. They're not going to be able to have that all written out. So ahead of time, we just said, what are points that kids might ask you on your case? What could be responses to those, and just practice that way. So there's a lot of just impromptu work going on in these rounds, because you don't know with those points of information how that's going to affect your time. You don't know what they're going to bring up. So you have to be ready to just be more rebuttal-y, if that's a word, more impromptu in what you talk about. So the impromptu rounds are very much like that. And actually our North Dakota kids won their impromptu rounds. We did much better in the impromptu rounds than we did in our prepared debates, which is kind of interesting, because you would think if they had time to prep and talk about and process the resolutions, but our kids were better critical thinkers and thinkers on their feet. So it'll be interesting to see how, as a group, our debaters do when we put them all together, our North Dakota kids. Because as nationally, we were much better at that. So I'll share both of those when I send out the email with the link to the video. I'll send out a link to those documents, and you'll be able to look at those as well. Okay, I'm just getting a message that our free thing is going to expire in 10 minutes. So I better whip through this PowerPoint here so you guys see the rest of what I have to say to you. And then and then we'll come back. I'm going to try
Okay.
my screen again. I hope it doesn't glitch out for you. But let's see if we can do it here. Okay. So the opposition obviously then could accept and debate. They could challenge. They could broaden the debate. And even if is kind of a little tricky, we're not going to talk a lot about that. The cases team, or the case, what we did a lot of was said to our kids, when you're pro, what do you want to say about this topic? What's your main thesis? Think about that so that you can have a couple of points that support that main thesis. When you're con, what's your main, or your opposition? All these different debates have every different term, but it's pro and con, right? When you're opposition, what are your main points that you want to have? So you would have the introduction that includes the definitions. You would have main arguments with examples. And not all the evidence, in fact, a lot of times the evidence is not a hard piece of evidence that says from the New York Times, this date at this time. It could be an example of a country where this has happened in the past. It could be an example of something in your own school district where standardized or where Common Core is a bad thing or a good thing, depending on what side they're on. So it doesn't have to be hard evidence that you find in an article. Although that could be what you use, that isn't necessarily the only thing to use, okay? Let me see if I can move on here. It doesn't want to go. Am I locked up again? Yep. Can you see me still? I'm going to stop sharing because I think that's my problem. This is lovely. I'm just having trouble. I'm going to quit sharing with you, and I'm just going to talk about what I have on the pages, and then I'll send out the link so you can see it, because I think it's the sharing that's
Okay.
Okay. Does that sound good? Okay. So argument structure.
Yeah, that's fine.
You're going to start with opening, body, summary, just like any other speech, you know, anything you're used to doing. It's a persuasive speech. That's what it is, Jeff. Okay? And we're going to start with a statement at the beginning. I usually tell them to have a fairly short tagline, explain that point, give an example, and then have a conclusion to that. So it's very much like writing a point in a paper or writing it in a speech to persuade. It's really just the same thing. Or it's like, instead of calling them contentions in Rachel, like we do in debate, you might just call them my first point, my second point, my third point.
Okay.
It's much more conversational than a traditional debate will be. I think that would, oh, here we go. I have a slide that when you get this Google presentation from me, that talks about, it says Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Government Whip. So if you think about that, this is like in British government, how the Prime Minister will present a point, the leader of the opposition will just debate that point. And then the Deputy Prime Minister comes up and says, well, here's what we think now. And the Deputy Leader Opposition comes up and says, well, here's what we think now. And then the Government Whip comes up and says, well, here's the summation of what we have to say, and the opposition whip comes up and does that as well. That's really what World Schools is about. And then they get a chance in those last 4 minutes each side to just sum up the whole thing, okay? But it's really a back and forth of the two sides of government is what World Schools is modeled after, if that makes sense, okay? I think I might have just lost you again. Oh, you're back. And I think that's okay. That's everything I had in the slideshow. I know I wasn't real specific in terms of like, here's an idea, but you can see the case structure is just really a persuasive speech. But the trick is to use that language about, Madam Chairman, this is what, and Jeff, I think you were like coming back into the room when we were talking about that. Because your video had quit, but the beginning of that debate really is like your pretending to be the prime minister of the country saying this is what it is. And you don't call yourself prime minister, but that's really the model of the speech. So if you ever watch, you know, House of Cards or something like that, you know, how the British people in their House of Commons will speak. And that's really kind of what this is like. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So I will share a link to a document that's the example of the agricultural subsidies case. I will share the follow-up POIs and rebuttals kind of work that we did. And I already sent you the link to the textbook, but it'll probably come out again because other people don't have that link yet. And then, I had told Jeff that there are some links to some research that already exists, because the first topic we're doing on the refugee thing was it was either September, October, or November PF topic. So there's a lot of research just floating around out there that I'll try to link a couple of things in so you have some quick research too, since we're kind of turning this around pretty fast. Okay. Feel free to, if you're working with your kids, email me and say, hey, we're thinking about this. Does this make any sense? I would love that. It would be fine. Okay. Jeff, do you think you're going to have kids for November or not till December? Oh, I think he glitched out on me. Rachel? Oh, I'm guessing I'm done. Oh, I think our free time is ending. I think the computer's telling me we're up. So.
Okay, well, thank you, Gail.
Yep, just send me an email or you know, y'all have my phone number, so call.
Okay.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.